Quick plug, as I'll say at sort of the end of my talk, I think that AOC is doing the kind of lay witness, ministry and witness that is desperately needed, not only in the church in America, but really worldwide. But I'll come back to that, why that is at the end. Forgive the slightly clickbait title, but it's hard to be subtle on a flyer. One of my parishioners is a religious studies professor at the University of Wisconsin, and he said, 10 moderately ill-considered notions about the Orthodox Church just did not have the ring. So he commended me for the clickbait title. One of the things that I want to say is that, the 10 lies that I'm going to look at with you are not lies in the strict moral sense. These aren't things that people say in malice, but they are things that all Orthodox Christians will say. They're the kinds of things we say to ourselves to make us feel good about ourselves. Before I was a priest, I was a therapist, and I must confess, any language that someone uses to make them feel good about themselves, I suspect. I think it's not a good thing. But whether these lies are innocently said or not is really secondary, because when we say these things, when we believe these things, we not only undermine the health of the parish, but we also undermine our own spiritual lives. So while I'm going to present these in a fairly lighthearted manner, don't assume from that these are not serious, because they are. So let's talk about our first lie. And our first lie is, we are the fastest growing religion in America. Has anyone heard that before? Oh, no, yeah. It's something that we stopped saying probably towards the middle to the end of the 90s, but you still hear it out there. Over the years, many Orthodox apologists and evangelists have said that Orthodoxy is the fastest growing religion in America. However, if you look at the numbers, you discover there's a different story. And the numbers tell us that we are shrinking. We aren't shrinking any faster than the Catholic Church or the mainline Protestant communities, but we are shrinking. Add to this that something like 60% of those children who are baptized in infancy will leave the church by the time they are 25. And add to that really only about 30% of us attend liturgy on a weekly basis. And you realize that we're not in a good place. We're losing people who are raised in the church. We're losing converts. We're losing young people. With converts, while exact numbers are hard to come by, based on at least the research I've done, it looks like we lose converts at roughly the same percentage as we lose young adults. So we are shrinking. So what can we do about it? Well, here are some possible solutions. Maybe we can have better programs or better apologetics, or maybe we can do something to revitalize traditional Orthodox cultures. Let's look at the first one. What we just need some better programs. Now, we do have some great programs out there, and they work very well for those people who participate in them. To name only a few, there's the Orthodox summer camp programs, Orthodox Christian Fellowship, which I've been involved with on and off for the last 20 years, Zoe for Life, Focus North America, Orthodox Christian Mission Center, and International Orthodox Christian Charities. All of these do good work, but the fact of the matter is these programs, as good as they are not reaching the majority of the faithful. So it really doesn't matter how good a program you have if people don't show up. So what else might we need in addition to programs? This is one of my favorite statements. The most loving thing I can do is to tell the truth. This is often used by people who are involved in the apologetic ministry of the church. And for those of you who don't know the word apologetic is that discipline of theology that is concerned with defending the faith. And so when I talk to people who are involved in apologetics, they will say to me, the most loving thing that you can do for someone is to tell them the truth. My retort is always the same: you're ugly and your mother dresses you funny. It may be true that you're ugly, and it may be true that your mother dresses you funny. But the fact of the matter is, telling you that is not going to make us friends. In fact, it's probably going to alienate you. Along with apologetics, we talk about how we need better religious education programs. And as John mentioned, I teach at the Ukrainian Seminary in New Jersey, and some of the classes I teach are young adult faith development. So I'm in the business of training youth ministers how to do religious education. So I think that this is important. But we need to be careful, because information alone is not sufficient. We need to learn, as the Apostle Paul says, how to speak the truth in love. When Jesus speaks to someone, even when he tells them a hard truth, like, if you would be perfect, go sell all you have and give to the poor and follow me, he's speaking as someone who has a deep, intimate knowledge of the person to whom he's speaking. When we are concerned about simply telling the truth in a bold fashion, we sometimes lose the person. We win the argument, but we lose the soul, to use an old phrase. But when Jesus speaks to someone, he speaks to that person as the God who called that person into existence from non-existence into being. He's speaking as the Creator who knitted that person together in his mother's womb. When Jesus tells us something which is true, he tells us something which is true and which is tailored to our need at the moment. When Jesus tells us something which is true, he tells us something to help us grow to become who he has created us to be. That's very different from an approach that says, let me give you the facts about the Orthodox Church, or let me just tell you the truth, and that's the loving thing. Sometimes what we say instead is, well, it's really about culture. And I hear this a lot because I travel in those circles where a lot of my friends are culture warriors. In the interest of full disclosure, I am not a culture warrior. I don't really care that much. But they'll complain about American culture, and they say, what we need to do is we need to go back to traditional Orthodox cultures. Now think about this for just a minute. There isn't an Orthodox parish that's 100, 75, or even 50 years old that wasn't started by the evangelical efforts of immigrant Orthodox Christians or their children. For these missionaries, America was a fertile missionary field. They may not have done things perfectly or even the way we would do them today, but so what? The fact of the matter is, they used what they had at hand to plant the church in America. And chief among the things that they had was their ethnic culture. They used their Greekness, their Russianness, their Arabness, their Ukrainianness, their Serbianness to build the church in America. The problem is that even under the best of circumstances, culture is only nominally Christian, because a culture is mixed with other traditions. And we know this as Americans, right? We have Christian things like Christmas and Easter, but at Christmas we have Santa Claus and a bottle of Coke at the creche for the baby Jesus. Cultures are always mixed. The best thing we can say about a culture, even an Orthodox culture, is that it is only more or less supportive of our life in Christ. And this is as true for traditional ethnic Orthodox cultures as it is for American culture. Now, there are two things that will trip us up. And this is what happens when we try to not engage with the world around us, when we just try to withdraw into our Orthodox ghettos or our Orthodox parishes or Orthodox cocoons. The first thing that we miss is that there's a lot of bad understanding of God that's popular in the culture. And because sometimes we look in the wrong direction, we end up neglecting the teaching of the church. Let's look at that first one, that bad understanding of God. We'll hear people say, God loves you and wants you to be happy. God loves you and wants you to be happy, and he wants you to be successful. What causes us a problem, though, when we say things like that, is that too many Orthodox Christians have bought into the idea that God's love for us should be limited by our own expectations. When we say God loves us and wants us to be happy and wants us to be successful, we mean God's here to give me what I want. That's not good. Happiness and success come not on my terms, but on God's. Let me give you a very quick example. John mentioned that I'm the pastor of a small mission church on the campus of the University of Wisconsin. Being on campus is important, but it presents a number of challenges. Pastoral challenges aside, it's just expensive. Because I do a lot of work in economics, I know the reason that it's expensive is because the University of Wisconsin has largely priced out everybody within about 3 miles of either direction. The only thing that exists in that area are things which basically the university values, which unfortunately is not a small Orthodox mission. It's not malicious, it's not intentional, it's just the fact that rental space is like $38, $39 per square foot. When I came from Dallas, I could rent an office building for $50 a square foot, but I would have all sorts of luxuries. $38 a square foot by University of Wisconsin is dirty. But because things are expensive and because of where we're located, because things are landlocked, this means that my community understands that it's never going to have a big building. And we're never going to be a large community because we're landlocked. We have a small space, what we rent, parking is always going to be a problem. And so if we define success as a mission according to our own expectations of lots of people and a pretty building, which are great things, we're just going to feel like failures. The fact of the matter is, what makes us successful as a mission is not numbers, but fidelity. We understand that we are where we are because this is what God wants from us. In fact, we had a parish council meeting 2 weeks ago, and my parish council president just spontaneously said, it's important, Father, that we reach out to students, but of course students have no money, so we're just going to have to give more. Happiness and success come only from fidelity to what God has called us to do, and nothing else. The other thing that we say, and I had mentioned that we neglect the fullness of the Orthodox teaching, is something that we hear a lot, and this has become more popular in the last several years. The Orthodox understanding of salvation is therapeutic, not legalistic. This one makes me crazy. Makes me crazy for a lot of reasons. First among them is that my wife is a federal prosecutor. So, law is like a big thing in our house. Her brother is a police officer in Texas, so we're law and order people. We like law. We like spreadsheets. We're even fond of regulations. Unfortunately, what gets lost when we overemphasize the therapeutic nature of salvation is our own moral and legal tradition. I'm not sure how many of you are aware of it, but there is a very large body of moral theology in the Orthodox Church, and there is a very large body of law, not only canon law, but also secular law, about how the church is supposed to relate to the state. Holy tradition is deeper and broader and richer than what can be captured in a slogan. We have a rich legal tradition, like I said, but we neglect it. We neglect our moral tradition. Instead, we just satisfy ourselves with slogans. Well, we're concerned about healing of the soul. And we are. But that healing of the soul requires that we understand the moral life and that we understand law. The other problem is that when we talk about the church's tradition as therapeutic, we don't use the word therapeutic the way it's used in secular society. Priests are not psychotherapists. I've been a psychotherapist. I can recognize when someone isn't. What heals us is fidelity to the tradition of the church. But fidelity to the tradition of the church doesn't exempt a person from the laws of human development or, in some cases, a need for psychotherapy. So often we neglect the moral and the legal aspects of our tradition because we don't want to deal with the fullness of what disturbs us. Part of what we have to struggle with as well are some mistaken notions about the spiritual life. Seeing what's wrong around us doesn't exempt us from making other mistakes in how we understand our own tradition, and here are three. We often misunderstand the relationship between monasticism and family life. We misunderstand what we mean by obedience, and we misunderstand the ministry of the spiritual father. Let's look at each of those in turn. I will sometimes hear people say we're called to live a life of interiorized monasticism, that in my heart I'm supposed to be a monk. That's not true. I'm not a monk. I'm a married man. I'm a married priest. As I said to a friend of mine a couple of weeks ago, I'm not broken in the way that would make sense for me to be a monk. I'm broken in the way that makes sense for me to be a married priest. Monasticism is not the foundation of the church. The foundation of the church, building on grace, is marriage and family life. Monastic life is modeled on the family. It's not the other way around. So what we need in the church, in addition to good monasteries, are strong marriages and strong families. And from strong marriages and families, we can have strong, healthy parishes and dioceses and a local church, a national church, and yes, even monasteries. But it really does begin with a commitment to marriage and family life. When we confuse monasticism and marriage and family life, when we make monasticism more important than marriage and family life, we end up dishonoring both, and eventually we begin to corrupt the parish. Well, someone will say, I don't know about that. I know that what I really need to do is to be obedient to my priest. Let me be blunt. Most Orthodox priests have little or no training in pastoral counseling or secular psychotherapy, or for that matter, how to be any real preparation as a spiritual father. You can study theology, you can study church history, but none of this really prepares you for hearing confessions and for guiding the soul. In the hands of an inexperienced or ill-prepared priest, obedience is a recipe for great and lasting harm, not only for the person and the parish, but for the priest himself. What we owe our priests, what I want as a priest, is not obedience. Please don't be obedient to me. What I would like is deference. And what I mean by that is this. In the absence of compelling evidence to the contrary, I think the priest should get his way in the day-to-day administration of the parish. He should get his way not because he's smartest or most pious or most prayerful or holy. He should get his way because when there's a mess, it's his to deal with. Or as I tell my parishioners, when there's a problem and the bishop calls, it's my phone he calls. So, since I'm the one who's going to be held accountable for it, I should get my way unless you have a good reason not to give me what I want. But this is purely practical. As for our daily lives, we should give the priest due consideration, but we don't owe him obedience. If a priest tells you you must do this under obedience, listen carefully, find a new priest. We are to be obedient to God, to our conscience, to the tradition of the church, not to the priest. But Father Gregory, my priest is my spiritual father. I think it's better to think about the priest not as a spiritual father along the monastic lines, but as a coach. Yes, the problem is we all suffer and because we're willful. But the solution is not to become willless. The solution to being willful is not to give my will over to the priest in obedience, but to learn how to be willing to do the will of God. We need to become ever more willing and able to say yes to God, to God's will for our life. In this process, our parish priest has an important role in the celebrating of the services, in the preaching of the gospel, at the homily, in teaching, in confession, and by the example of his life. All of these things go together to help us discern God's will for our lives and to learn how to be obedient to what God wants from us. But as a priest, I can't do this without your participation, without your willingness to work with me. This means more than just you personally coming to talk to me. To do my job as your coach, I need everybody to suit up and take the field. And that's really what does in a lot of our parishes. We have a few people who want to take the spiritual life seriously, and the rest are happy to just sort of float along like a stick in the river. We must all want to know and do the will of God for our lives, and we must all want to help each other discern and fulfill what God wants from us personally. And if one person doesn't do it, the whole community suffers. So what is it that we need? We need a relationship with Jesus Christ. It's there on the slide. It must be true. Y'all are very polite. I'm used to college students who are much more combative, which is okay. Now, Father Gregory, the things you've said haven't been too bad, but let's be honest, a personal relationship with Jesus Christ isn't an Orthodox thing. It's a Protestant thing. My first parish was in rural Northern California, and there were a number of evangelical Christians, and they would often ask me, have you accepted Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior? And I knew more ways to not answer that. I could not only not answer it, I could make the person feel bad for asking. Until one day I realized, had I not answered the question yet again, that maybe the reason I wasn't answering is because the answer was not yes. Maybe the answer was no. Maybe I did not have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, or maybe the relationship I had faded. Evangelical Christians have certainly run with the idea of a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. That's their big claim. That's on the banners. But you know, it's still true, even though evangelical Christians say it. A personal relationship with Jesus Christ is the starting point of our life in Christ. When we are asked by our evangelical friends and neighbors, have you accepted Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior, our answer should be to say truthfully, yes. But remember, this is the first step, and the first step isn't invalid because it's only a beginning. Think about the toddler who says, Mommy, I love you. The toddler doesn't know what that means. And yet, for all that, it's still true. Now imagine that same toddler 50, 60, 70 years in the future, standing at her mother's bed. And she says, it's okay, Mom. You don't need to hang on anymore. Go be with Dad. I love you. Does that last I love you invalidate the first I love you? Of course it doesn't. That last I love you was contained in the first one. That first I love you grew into the last one. All starting points are deficient because they're the first step. But without that first step, our relationship with God can't blossom. We can't grow and mature in our Christian life until we take that first step and enter into a relationship with Jesus Christ. St. Herman of Alaska says, from this time forth, from this hour, from this minute, let us love God above all else. Christos Ioannaros, Orthodox moral theologian. We know God by cultivating a relationship, not by understanding a concept. Yeah, here we go. You just got to know the person. Where do we go from here? The very first thing we need to do is not lie. I've put 10 lies up on the screen. If you agree with any of those, not if you agree with all of them, but if you agree with just one or two of them, don't repeat them. Don't lie. Don't say things like a personal relationship with Jesus Christ is a Protestant, not an Orthodox thing. Don't say if we were just more Greek or more Arab or more Russian or more American, the church would be fine. Don't lie. The second thing we need to do is this. St. Gregory Palamas, who happens to be my patron, in a sermon entitled Staying to the End of the Divine Services, isn't that funny? 14th century Greek archbishop had trouble with people leaving liturgy early. St. Gregory Palamas says, the wise providence of God orders our affairs in many different ways and lovingly bestows on each one of us what is appropriate and profitable both for virtuous deeds and the mystery of faith. What the saint is getting at there is that God has poured out grace into each and every one of our lives in baptism and chrismation. God has given us the grace and the gifts we need to follow him as his disciples and to follow him and to be his witnesses to the world. We need to foster this sense of personal commitment to Christ and personal responsibility for the work of Christ, not just for the parish, but for the church in the United States and in the world. In my own view, what we need are more active lay ministries, exactly like the one that brought me here. While AOC is a good start, and is something that I think is needed for the church in America, we need all Orthodox Christians to take seriously their personal call to follow Jesus Christ as his disciple and witness. We need multiple forms of Orthodox lay ministry. When the men who started AOC called me and they asked me about it, they said, do we need to get a blessing from our bishop or our parish priest? And I said, no, of course not. You don't need a blessing from a bishop or a priest to act on your baptism. God has already called each and every single one of you who are here this evening, to be his disciple and to be his witness. Every person in this room has a calling from God which is as important and as valuable and as true as my calling as a priest. So I promised John I would bring this in no more than 30 minutes, and I have now at 29:06. So why don't we stop here, and I want to thank you for your kind attention and look forward to your questions and our conversation. And don't be so passive, please. For years, while I was getting ready to be ordained to the priesthood, I worked as a psychotherapist with basically juveniles, and I did group therapy. And it's been 20 some odd years, but whenever a group of people gets quiet, I get really anxious. Because my kids came armed. Yes, sir. John's got the microphone, and he'll come around to you.
Oh, okay. Is it like that one? So I've never heard the therapeutic term as it was used in that.
Right.
I don't think I would be able to recall the exact. Had salvation in there and therapeutic, but I've never heard that use of the word.
Yeah, a lot of times, is there a question? Do you want me to explain it, or?
Well, yeah, I really did make a question there. Was that from a particular time ago? Is that something that is said in certain channels that I'm just not aware of? Or am I not understanding that word?
No. I mean, I'll a lot of times what we'll hear, it'll show up in Orthodox polemics against Protestants in particular. I am not a fan of polemics, arguments that are meant to sort of tear down the other side. I'm good at them, mostly because I cheat. I mean, if I'm going to win at the expense of your dignity, I'm just going to win. So I just don't do that. But what we'll hear is sometimes people say, well, the Protestant understanding of God is that God is angry and his sense of justice needs to be satisfied, and so he sends his son, and his son has to die, and blood has to be spilled because God is angry. But we're Orthodox. We're hippies. And our God is a loving God. And our God, our understanding of salvation is therapeutic. God doesn't pay the penalty for our sin. He heals us of our sin. Now, I'm being a little hyperbolic there, but it's basically something that we say to try to differentiate ourselves from primarily Protestant evangelical Christians. And I mean, to be frank, a big part of the reason that we do that is that we have a lot of former evangelical Christians who are making sort of the psychological transition from their former confession to orthodoxy. But you do hear it in other places as well. By profession, I'm a social scientist, and my area is personality theory and religion. And, about once or twice a year, I'll have someone come up to me and say, well, you can't study spiritual life and religion scientifically. Oh, well, golly, I'm not sure what I've been doing the last 25 years, but thanks for pointing out that a quarter century of my life has been pointless. But I mean, yeah, it really does become a polemic. But more importantly, what happens is that we end up then saying, well, we're not really concerned about moral issues. We're not really concerned about cultural issues. As long as, you love people and you have a good thought for people and your heart's in the right place. And that's just not true. None of that's true. It is not sufficient to just have warm feelings for people. You actually have to do the right thing. So it's a way to sort of distance ourselves from moral obligations and from engaging the culture. As a consequence of that, by the way, and if anyone else has a question, just stick your hand up because I'll just keep talking. My first job as a teacher, I lectured 5 periods in a row, so I can talk for 5 hours. But, a lot of times we use this as a way just to avoid social issues. Go ahead.
Well, so I just want to get some clarity on this because you're not saying that orthodoxy is void of a therapeutic method in reality.
Maybe. It depends on what you mean by therapeutic.
Well, from my perspective, and I'm a convert to the church, but I've embraced orthodoxy. And I find it refreshing to know that just having been baptized and accepted Christ into my life, that boom, all of a sudden, I'm in heaven and I'm So the idea that I have to work at it.
We do have to work at it.
Right? And
right.
So and there has been, a number of theologians that have talked about it. St. John of the Ladder has describes in his Ladder of Divine Descent things that, are not just meant for monastics, but for everybody.
Let's step back a little bit. Most everything that St. John the Ladder says is meant for monks. It's not meant for lay people. Yes, we are concerned about the healing of the soul, but that use of language that there's a therapeutic method, that's new language. And it from my own point of view, is that it's not helpful language because it's not clear. We do have a way of healing the soul. We do try to heal the passions. We had tried to heal our disordered loves. But in order to understand how to heal my disordered loves, I need to know what love actually looks like, and that's the discipline of moral theology. And that requires a different kind of work. But again, I don't mind if people want to talk about the therapeutic method of the church, but if they're going to talk about the therapeutic method of the church, I expect, not directed at you, but especially priests, If they're going to talk about the therapeutic method of the church, they better understand what secular psychotherapy is, because they're talking to people who think in those terms. And one of the main proponents of the therapeutic method in Church of Greece, Metropolitan Hierotheos, is really very clear. What the church offers is radically different from what happens in psychotherapy, in secular psychotherapy. And so you want to be really careful about using a term that has two radically different meanings. Does that make sense?
Well, so it sounds to me more like you're saying the term, which is the English term, but I agree, is probably too narrow in scope.
I think it's too narrow. I mean, I will generally talk to people about spiritual formation. And I'll go on to explain that formation is a matter of helping people first discern their calling. What is it God has called me to do in this life? And then how is it that I go about the business of putting that calling into practice? So, for example, God called me to marry my wife, but there's a lot of work on the other, especially for her. I am no easy person to be married to. But we all know this. So that therapeutic language, that's a problematic term for me. But I also come from a fairly secular background. So, but good question. Let the mic get over there, and AOC gentlemen are on it this evening.
New subject.
Okay.
The first slide was about the lack of growth and the actual shrinking of the Orthodox Church. I go to St. Nick's, and I'm wondering, we see that in our priest, Father Ministers trying to grow our church. Why is it so important that we grow? Why can't we be happy with the content and the parishioners and the ministries we do, locally? Why is it important that we grow the Orthodox faith?
What's important is that that's a good question, by the way. What's important is that we first introduce people to Jesus Christ. Again, I'll be very direct with you. A lot of times Orthodox Christians are more comfortable introducing the Orthodox Church than they are introducing Jesus Christ. Let's call it. It is. There's nothing wrong. It's a good thing to preach the gospel. It's a good thing to bring more people to Christ. It's a good thing to join more people to Jesus Christ through the sacraments of baptism and chrismation, and that they can receive Holy Communion. These are all good things, but sometimes God doesn't ask us to do that, at least in the way that we think. For example, again, I've got a small parish that will always be a small parish. Unless you have $2 million, I have business cards, and we do take money online. But so if you want to preach the gospel, if you want to introduce people to Jesus Christ, I think that's wonderful. If you want to increase the number of stewards, that's problematic. I will tell you this: if you help people establish a relationship with Jesus Christ, you will have more people in church, you will have better stewards, you will have more active ministries. But I think we need to look very carefully about what we're doing. And again, I had mentioned before, there's not a parish 100 years old in America that wasn't started by someone who just came over from the old country. Their children and grandchildren now have limited the ministry of the laity to parish council, teaching church school, and singing in the choir. These are all wonderful things. I have a small choir in my parish, and it's lovely. And we don't do church school because a good chunk of us are university or seminary professors. So it's just coffee hour. And I have a parish council. These are all good things. But think about it for just a minute. For most Orthodox Christians, for most people to become Orthodox Christian means basically to attend liturgy on Sunday. And that's not a bad thing, but it's not the fullness of what it is to be a Christian. Well, and that's the other thing. A lot of times we talk about introducing people to orthodoxy, when actually what we should be doing is introducing people to Jesus Christ and the gospel. Try that for like a month, give you a little bit of homework. Every time you want to say, hey, let me tell you about the Orthodox Church, say instead, let me tell you about Jesus Christ. And instead of saying, I want to talk about orthodoxy, let me tell you about the gospel. See how that already changes things? So yeah, I mean, I think it's great if you grow. But we've got to grow in the right way for the right reasons. So I'm not going to make a judgment on what's going on here, but I'll just say that. That make sense? Sort of. Well.
In your little, thing.
Yeah, well, yeah. We'll think about it. It's just, this is new information in a new way. And I'm still not used to this time zone. Yes, sir.
Hello, Father.
Hello.
Just a question about the one slide you have, we as Orthodox Christians.
Could you speak up, please? I can't hear you.
We as Orthodox Christians should be in a position to more evangelize for our Lord Jesus Christ, and that was a Protestant idea, that slide.
About personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Yes. Yeah, that's an Orthodox idea.
Yeah, okay, so the name of your meeting is lies that are told, so obviously you're seeing that as a lie. One of the lies within Orthodox.
One of the lies that I will hear from Orthodox Christians is that they will dismiss the language. We don't talk about a personal relationship with Jesus Christ.
I agree on a convert from 2010.
Okay.
And my question is, what's the converse of that? Where does that come from? Is there a standing idea within Orthodoxy that most people may or may not be aware of? That was steeped in tradition, perhaps.
That we don't have a personal relationship?
Yeah, could you elaborate on that?
There is nothing in tradition that says you don't have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ.
Well, what I'm leading to is what was the real need to even have that up there if there wasn't some kind of...
We say it. We tell people we don't have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. We have a communal relationship with Jesus Christ, or we have a relationship with his body, the church.
Okay, so is that more tradition? What you're saying, in fact, is that personal relationship with Jesus Christ is supposed to have been the real tradition?
Personal relationship is not language, and it's not language that the fathers would have used.
Is there anyone within Orthodoxy now that would contend with that idea? That's my question. Maybe they'll be great at Orthodox. Or is that picking at a scale, maybe?
No, I don't care. No, I mean, we just don't, all I can tell you is that when most Orthodox Christians are asked, do you have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, they avoid the question.
I guess that's what I was really asking.
Yeah, and that's...
Is there a reason for that?
Yeah, because we don't have one. I'm sorry, look, Father Gregory asked me this. Do you love your wife? Go ahead.
Do you love your wife?
Yes! Father Gregory, do you love Jesus Christ? Ask that.
Do you love Jesus Christ?
Yes! You see how easy that is. You see? I love my wife. I love Jesus. If someone asks me, do you have a relationship with Jesus Christ? Then you have to, but that you should. This is what we should have. Because it's only that relationship with Jesus Christ that makes sense of everything that we do as Orthodox Christians. I love my wife. I really do. Let me finish. I'm not done. I have them. I'm in the front of the room. Imagine what would happen to my marriage if every time I turned to my wife, I quoted one of Shakespeare's sonnets. Honestly, Shakespeare said it so much better than I could. How long would I be married? Now think about what happens in the spiritual life where we're going to pray in the morning. So we open our prayer book and we stand at attention like a soldier on guard duty, and we read our prayers to God. I'm not against prayer books. But a real relationship requires a real conversation. And so often we reduce our relationship to Jesus Christ, if we can even call it that, to the formal words of the prayer book or of the liturgy. And you see, this is really the problem. And God has brought the church into America and has confronted Orthodox Christians with so many people who are passionate to know if we have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. I figure at some point we probably need to take seriously the fact that these people keep showing up in our lives. That's just me, but I have a hope. But so if you have anything else, if it's quick, but because other people.
Just to elaborate just a little bit on that same thing, do you feel that it's okay to really share faith? There's a lot of Protestants that come in within Orthodoxy love to share their faith, and I quite frankly had some credit Orthodox say, well, it's not proper to do right here.
So
I would like your opinion.
Absolutely. When we moved from Dallas to Pittsburgh, there was this, Dallas, Texas to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, there was this game called hockey. We didn't know from hockey, we were from Dallas. We knew from football, when we had a good team. Anyway, one day, it turned out that the Pittsburgh Penguins made the Stanley Cup playoffs. We knew nothing of hockey at this point. We did not realize that the playoffs were the equivalent of a participation ribbon at the science fair. As near as I could tell, everybody almost makes the playoffs. And we had no idea about hockey, but everyone we knew in Pittsburgh was excited that the Penguins were in the playoffs. So because they were excited, we watched, and we had no idea what was going on. But we watched because the people we loved hockey. Well, the next year, the Penguins again made the playoffs, and they went to the Stanley Cup. But this time, we watched from the beginning. And it was the year that Fox put the little microchip in the puck so you could follow it, and we were contemptuous of people who needed the graphic on the screen. We knew nothing of hockey the year before, but now we were experts. What made us experts in hockey, at least in our own mind, is that people we loved love hockey. It works the same way in the spiritual life. People who love us, who love Jesus, help us to love Jesus. And the only way that I can learn to love Jesus is if someone who loves Jesus tells me that Jesus is lovable. I had mentioned to some of the guys beforehand, I spent one summer as a supply priest in the Pittsburgh, Cleveland area, 12 weeks, new parish every Sunday for 12 weeks. It was great. I needed one sermon. So for 12 weeks, I preached the same sermon, Jesus loves you, and in every parish, Greek, Russian, Arab, Serbian, Romanian, Carpatho-Russian, Ukrainian, old calendar, new calendar. I got the same two responses. That was the best sermon I ever heard. And then the person would look down for a second and look kind of shy and would say, and I never knew. And that just broke my heart. Person after person did not know that they were loved by Jesus Christ. And you see, unless I know that I'm loved by Jesus Christ, I can't really follow him. Who I'm going to follow is some picture I have of him. I'm not really his disciple. I'm a disciple of a Jesus who I made up in my own mind. But when I know that Jesus loves me, when I know that he has called me to do something that only I can do, then my spiritual life begins in earnest. It is like falling in love. And forgive me, but we are very good on theology and liturgy and music. We are not so good at matchmaking. You see what I mean? Ask yourself this, and forgive me, none of the priests are here, so I can get away with this. When was the last time you heard a sermon where Father got up and said, did you know that Jesus loves you, and pretty much after that, nothing else matters? Next, I asked a question, now you ask a question. See, I always get quiet when I get evangelical. I was Catholic before I was Orthodox. I had my formation was monastic, so I don't skew evangelical. It's just because I love Jesus. Nothing else? Yes, sir. And hold on, let the mic get there.
I think one of your slides was talking about spiritual fathers, and you said that parish priest isn't necessarily a good spiritual father. He can be your confessor, but not your spiritual father.
Right.
Can you elaborate more on the idea of spiritual father and the necessity of a spiritual father?
The necessity of a spiritual father, that's kind of problematic. The office of spiritual father is something that arises out of monastic life. And in a monastery, you have a spiritual father who's usually the abbot or another priest or another monk in the community. And so it's someone with whom you live on a day-to-day basis. So one of the first problems of having a spiritual father, if you're not a monastic, is that the spiritual father and the spiritual child don't actually know each other because they don't really share everyday life. Does that make sense? It doesn't matter how much I loved my wife when we were dating. I didn't actually get to know her until we were living together and we got married. And it's like, this is who I fell in love with. And unfortunately for her, this is who I fell in love with. So one of the difficulties about talking about having a spiritual father with whom you have a fairly emotionally and physically distant relationship is that person doesn't know you. And again, part of it is having been a therapist. One of the things you learn as a therapist is that clients lie all the time about everything. And it's just, I wish I could tell you I was being cynical, but it's. But and of course they lie. That's why they're in therapy. But so when I sit, that kind of intimate relationship takes a lot of effort. And that just isn't something that can happen in a parish because you don't have that kind of time. You don't share that kind of day-to-day life. And then you add to that, to be frank with you, if a priest doesn't have good training even in the basics of pastoral counseling or secular counseling, he's going to make some egregious mistakes. I spent 3 years as a graduate student training new therapists, and honestly, it is enough to just drive anyone to despair. So what you have in your parish priest is a person who you can go to for confession, and maybe some advice. Maybe you'll find someone who isn't your parish priest who you can talk to, that you can have a more intimate relationship. But I have to confess to you, I am very hesitant to become too intimately involved with parishioners. I get requests to be someone's confessor or spiritual father on a regular basis, and I always say the same thing: no, I'm not really the right person for you to talk to. And they will insist, and then we will have a conversation, and they will be angry and their feelings will be hurt. Because whoever... Pardon me?
You think that's because of your psychotherapy background?
No, it's because of the fantasy they had about who I was. I'm much easier to date than marry. Well, don't laugh, so are you. This isn't... But spiritual fatherhood is like marriage. And so it is a very intimate, long-term relationship, and outside of the monastic life, I think that's going to be fairly rare. But there's no obligation to have a spiritual father. Read the Gospels. Pardon me?
Would it be necessary to salvation like many of the early church fathers?
No, it's not necessarily. What's necessary for salvation is what's found in the text of the New Testament. Everything that's not found in the New Testament is elaboration about what is found in the New Testament. But when the fathers of the church talk about the tradition, what they mean are the scriptures. And in the scriptures, there's no obligation to have a spiritual father. It's great if you have that kind of a relationship. But again, outside of a monastic community, it's rare. And I think as well, and this is my last point, there has been, especially since the fall of communism, a great deal of difficulty with self-appointed spiritual fathers. And we should not think that in America it is any less common. So Patriarch Cyril, when he was running the Office of External Affairs for the Moscow Patriarchate, said, one of the great problems is young priests or even older priests who set themselves up as spiritual fathers who simply don't know what they're doing. That doesn't mean they aren't good priests in other avenues, other arenas. I'm good at what I do. Please don't come to me for heart surgery. So, all right, anything else? Yes, sir.
So I guess it was, I kind of have a question on, you were elaborating more on better ways to develop a close spiritual personal connection to Christ.
Yeah.
And then you kind of talked about how prayer from a prayer book was kind of too, I guess, strict or stringent, or what is it?
It's not enough.
It's not enough.
It's
So
not
then
enough.
would you insinuate that we should just create our own prayers, and then wouldn't that kind of just fall into a more of a conversation and not really of a prayer, so to speak?
Well, prayer is conversation.
But I mean, wouldn't that just be less reverent? Wouldn't that be like not as...
Well, only if you say less reverent things. But no, I mean, but the whole point of prayer is that I lift my heart and mind to God, and I open myself up less to talk to God and more to listen to God. And what happens sometimes in our spiritual life with the prayer book is that I've got to get through all these prayers because I have to go to work. And so I don't so much talk to God as blather at him. But the whole point of opening the book and praying is to bring myself into the presence of God so that I can experience a moment of intimacy with God, so that I can hear God. And the thing is, if I keep talking, I can't hear what you're going to say, which is what's happening right now. Though you're giving me clues by nodding, but do you see what I mean? Yeah, just listen to God. But that requires that we still ourselves, that we quiet our imagination and that internal monologue that we all have going on all the time. And the prayer book can be helpful, but in my experience, even when I'm reading prayers, my mind wanders.
Isn't that kind of the point of the prayers is to, through repetition of the same thing of like the Jesus prayer or something like that, to slowly bring yourself on a more focused line towards Christ instead of falling into different thoughts of this world or your obligations?
Well, this first of all, this world is all we have. We don't have the kingdom of, we have only the kingdom of God in seed form. But yeah, the point of the Jesus prayer is to start to still the imagination and still the conversation. Though, fun fact, when the Jesus prayer was first presented, for example, in Russia in the 19th century, the general considered opinion was that it was heresy. So the Jesus prayer is a relatively late addition in the Orthodox life. The hesychastic prayer from the Desert Fathers were just what are called short ejaculations. "Oh God, come to my assistance, O Lord, make haste to help me." They were very short prayers, and they were to be uttered throughout the day. But what you're aiming at is to calm the imagination, calm the internal monologue. Does anyone know what I mean when I say the internal monologue? You know that chat that you have all the time? Pardon me? Monkey mind, yes. That's the conversation that says, no matter how it starts, it always gets to the same place. I'm bad, I'm stupid, I'm not worth loving. That's what we have to calm down. And if the prayer book helps, great. If the Jesus prayer helps, great. But yeah, there are other ways. Do women have questions? See, I'm a chaplain at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and it's a very progressive place. And to be perfectly honest, I studied a lot of feminist thought. So this many women who are silent strikes me as problematic. For reasons... Which
One more question, anybody? I was particularly struck by your statement that about the therapeutic and legalistic aspects of
Right.
how we approach polemics or what have you.
Yeah.
And I suppose if there's anyone in this room that's responsible for being a polemical hitman for orthodoxy, it might be me. And I give that presentation regularly about courtroom theology and medicinal theology. And I'm trying to analyze where you come from and what are you really saying. And this is, tell me if I'm right. We distinguish ourselves from the Protestants by saying, you got courtroom theology, we got medicinal theology. And then we make the mistake that we have just now told them, you're not us. And because we keep hearing this, you have a personal relationship with Jesus from them, we jump to the wrong conclusion saying, well, that's not us.
Yeah.
Whereas it is us.
It is us, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what we're really trying to do is say to ourselves, initially, is it's not a punctiliar one saying, always say, and so we want to reject that concept, and we make the mistake, and we don't accept the true statement, correct?
There are a lot of clauses in what you just said, so I'm having
There's a lot of what?
clauses.
Okay.
Little part,
Flaws?
clauses, not flaws. No, just partial statements. Clauses.
Well, let me give you some. It seems to me that when you end up saying it's not it doesn't end with therapeutic because we have all these moral rules or the morality. All morality in Orthodoxy and all Christianity in the end comes down to not rules, but love. In the end, it's a relationship. We can't ever put form over substance. So in the end, the medicinal metaphor is always governing.
Well,
We can't ignore the morality, but in the end, love is what's in the morality. And it's not the rule, it's why.
no, it's the rule. It is the rule. No, let me be clear. Well, no, it's the rule too. And you simply, not you, but a man can't say to his wife, I love you, so rules don't. It's not really about rules. It's about love, so I can sleep with other women. There are rules. There are hard and fast rules that we cannot violate if we wish to grow in love, and that never falls away. You can't separate them like that. And while love is the sum of the law, you still have to know the law. Again, if you want to talk about a therapeutic method, that's fine. But then you need to really talk about what it requires to learn to be a good therapist or to be a good physician, which is a lot of hard study and work and memorization, and a lot of it is boring and just unpleasant. So no, there are rules, and there are canons. There are whole sections in canon law about of penance for different sins. And the same fathers who talk about love talk about if you commit sin X, you must fast for 20 years on bread and water and stay outside the church. So I'm fine if you want to talk about therapy, but then let's talk about what therapy demands. It's good to talk about love, but you have to keep the content of love, and the form matters. There has to be a form there, and it has to be, and it's concrete. I'm a moral theologian. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.